I was a student nurse at Ermello Hospital in the early 80s, and we had to do both night duty and day duty in different wards. I was allocated to do night duty in the children's ward, on the same level as the female ward. Doing night duty in the children's ward meant working all by yourself, unless there were so many children that they would send someone to help you out. I heard so many stories about the children's ward, but at the time, I did not believe in ghosts. I came on duty that night with only 5 little patients to look after. They were all young, and because they were kids, they tended to go to sleep earlier than the adults. I did my rounds after handover time and went back to check on each child. We had 5 cubicles, each with 2 beds or cots in it. And then there was the 6th cubicle with 6 beds in it. That cubicle was hardly used. All had glass partitions, so you could see right to the back when you sit in the duty room. The first cubicle had 2 young boys in it. The second cubicle had a cot with a baby in it. The third cubicle was empty, as the patients in there were discharged during the day. And the fourth cubicle had 2 girls in it. 1 or 2 doctors came to do rounds, and I escorted them, but there were no new orders, and they were satisfied with their patients. After the night sister came to help me with the meds, seeing I was not allowed to hand out meds myself yet. I gave the children their meds, and it was not very long when they all went to sleep. Just now and then, the baby in the cot was a bit restless, but otherwise, they all slept well. I went to the duty room to write my reports after the doctors came and did rounds earlier. Around 2 a.m., I received a call from a doctor saying he is sending a boy in for observation. He gave me the orders and said he would see the child in the morning. If something happens, then I must just phone him. I let the night sister know, and she came up to help me with the admission. Right from the start, I saw that the little chubby-cheeked boy did not like the idea of being in a hospital. It was the policy that the parents were not allowed to stay with their children unless they were very ill. So the night sister spoke nicely to them that they could stay a bit, but they must leave. They saw that I was working with their child in a nice manner and decided to leave the child in my care. Sister stayed a bit after the administration of the meds to see if it would calm the boy down, as he was scream-crying at times. The night sister left a while later with a message that I must phone her later on if the meds did not kick in yet. She would then phone the doctor. She just laughed at me and said, "Nursey, I think you have a live wire here. Maybe I will ask the nurse in the female ward to come and relieve you later if he does not calm down." The night sister left, and I was left with this unhappy chubby boy. I took a chair next to his cot, and I thought all that would help him might be some singing. So I started to sing softly to this red curly-head chubby boy. He sort of relaxed a bit, but as soon as I stopped, he moaned again. I spoke softly to him as not to disturb the other kids. I could sense the medicine was busy kicking in as he got slower and softer. The nurse from the female ward came to chat with me and did my rounds for me and said all of the others are sleeping. I might just call her if she needs to take over. I must have sat there for about 20 minutes when he started to calm down a bit. I kept on singing to him. I felt someone at the back of me. I'm sitting with my back to the door and assumed it was the female ward nurse again and started chatting to her. All of a sudden, this little boy jumped up in the cot, moved to the feet end, and held up his arms and made baby gurgling noises like it was his mom coming in. I sat there, looking at this happen in front of my eyes. The baby moved to the right-hand corner of the cot, following something. My hair was standing up, and I had chills all over. I realized that I was not alone in that room with that child. Something was there. I got up and ran out of the room as fast as my legs could carry me, right to the duty room of the female ward. The 2 sat there and they looked at me. The junior nurse said, "Wow, did you see a ghost or something? You are very pale." I could not speak for a while. Eventually, I got the courage to say something. Those nurses got up and walked with me to the child's cubicle. After I told them what just happened, and lying in the bed, covered with his blanket, the baby was lying, sucking his thumb, fast asleep. They both looked at me, then at the baby, then ran back. I stood there, and I could feel no presence in the room any longer. Then I remembered the stories of the children's ward that I heard. There was once a very sick baby, and the baby died, and the mother could not come to terms with the death of her child and committed suicide. She is claimed to roam the ward, looking for her baby. The others of a young boy of 6 who went for an operation but died of complications and is often heard asking for water from the nurses. I believe it must have been that mother that came and helped me to put the baby to sleep. The occurrence was about 30 years ago when, as a student, I worked as a security guard in London. Although I've had quite a few strange experiences, this was by far the most interesting. It was summer on a sunny Saturday morning. By this time, I'd been promoted to area inspector, so I had a number of teams to look after across London. Over the radio, I'd been speaking with a friend and colleague. It seemed like a good idea to meet up for coffee, and one of my sites due a visit was the South London Women's Hospital in Tooting. We agreed to meet up there. This hospital had been closed for a number of years, had suffered squatters, resulting in a team of 3 sanctioned security guards and a visiting dog unit to assist in covering what was quite a large area. Like most hospitals, there was the original smaller building, added to by large corridors and additional structures. I'll describe the layout as it is relevant and saves further explanation. Through the large wooden double entrance doors, there was a further set of double doors taking you into the short hallway with a reception room on the left. To the right were doors to some wards. More or less straight on led to the back and new parts of the building with access to the gardens. Left was a corridor, the entrance door to the reception room, a huge lift, and 2 day rooms or waiting rooms, one at the end of the corridor. To the right were windows into an overgrown quadrangle. The area was light and spacious. At the end of the corridor, there were 2 glazed double doors leading to an oak structure that only reached the first floor. This staircase is a noted design feature and a historical interest. It accesses a short section comprising a very short corridor with a dead end of fire exit doors. On both sides, there were 2 small rooms, well lit, and they were probably private rooms. They were empty. My friend, who I'll refer to as S, and I met at the front with our small van squeezed into the small drop-off point. Bounding into the place, we stuck our heads into the reception room where the guards were and volunteered to do a patrol for them if they put the kettle on. All was well. On went said kettle. As we were about to start the patrol, we both saw a lady walk out of the far room on the left nearest the double doors towards the fine staircase. We launched into a run, both of us calling out, "Excuse me, madam." We repeated this while saying to each other that we had an intruder. The figure kept walking away from us and through the double glass doors, which he got to and through as the figure was now up the staircase, and I got a side front profile for a moment. The figure disappeared, vanished. I said to S, I'd stand point as the staircase top was the only exit point, and he was much taller than I was. He returned within a few minutes saying there was no one there. I asked him to stand point and I'd look. Nothing, so we shrugged our shoulders and went through the rooms together, checking the security of the windows and noting the fire door, locked and further secured by a padlock and chain. Our conclusion was that we had seen an intruder, but they were no longer on the premises. I personally wrote up a description in the duty logbook as we sipped on our coffee. It was only some years later that, on reflection, I knew for certain that we had seen a ghost. This is where critics and psychologists get it completely wrong. Our minds made the event look completely normal. The fact that the figure vanished before our eyes was washed away by an assumption that the figure had kept on going up the stairs and we had lost sight. Impossible, in fact. So the detail, the figure was female, dressed in blue. She was holding a file or clipboard, or similar to her left arm against her body. We heard her footsteps on the wooden floor. I believe she opened or pushed one of the double doors to go through it, but I can't be certain of that. In my mind, rationalizing as our minds do, saw it as so because a person can't walk through a shut door. I clearly recall not being able to make out the facial features at all, and I should have been able to do this. There was no other exit, and we had it covered. A ghost? Yes, of course. A nurse. The hospital is now a Tesco store. I believe they were unable to save many fine architectural features as English Heritage refused to list them. Of personal interest, I have met quite a few people who only later realized they had a ghostly encounter. Some incidents are more obvious than others, I suppose. I never actually believed in ghosts, maybe because I had never had any experience. But this incident has changed my whole perspective on the paranormal. This experience is not mine, it's my mother's. She works as a nurse in a hospital in Nairul. The day this incident happened to her, she had to do an evening shift, and the day after that, she had a morning shift. During such consecutive shifts, my mom prefers to stay at the hospital in her room along with her colleagues, rather than return home at night and head back to work in the morning. On that day during her evening shift, she started running a fever, and by the time her shift was over, at 11 p.m., she was really sick. So she just informed a fellow doctor about her fever, and after a quick prayer, she's very spiritual by the way, she quickly went off to sleep in her room. Her roommate was on a night shift, so she was alone in her room. Anyway, she quickly dozed off to sleep. It was about 2 a.m. when she heard the door of her room open. She was surprised because she never sleeps with the door open, but she thought maybe she had forgotten to latch the door as she was very tired and sick. She saw someone dressed in a white coat. He had a stethoscope around his neck. She thought he might be a doctor who was on night rounds and came to check on her since she had informed earlier that she was sick. Suddenly, she felt unusually cold in her room as if someone had switched on the AC. As the man approached her, she noticed that with every step he took towards her, his face started to change. And what followed was even more strange. His face took the form of every single person she had met in her life, including me and my family. She was petrified. She couldn't utter a word, forget screaming. My mom tried to be rational and thought she was hallucinating under the influence of fever. She blinked a few times and then looked at the figure. This time she noticed that he had a handsome but unfamiliar face and was standing right next to her by the bed. He did not speak to her or ask her any questions. He just reached out his hand and started checking her neck for temperature. By this time, she was convinced that he was a doctor and nothing else. She noticed something quite odd though. As soon as he placed his hand on her neck, she noticed that his hands were very cold. When it got unbearable, she tried to get rid of his hand, but to her surprise, he reached out his other hand and started choking her. My mom was terrified by this, and when she looked up to his face, it once again started taking the shape of all her loved ones. She wanted to scream at that moment, but couldn't even manage a whisper. That's when she realized that she had a rosary in her bag, close to her bed. She quickly reached out for it, and as soon as she held it in her hand, that creature, whatever it was, just gave out a howl and vanished into thin air. My mom quickly got out of the room, taking the rosary with her. She fled to her friend's room, and after catching her breath, she told her everything. She was also startled on hearing this and said that she had had similar experiences in the hospital, like the lights going on and off on their own at night and sounds coming from a closed room. Anyway, for the rest of the night, she stayed with her and returned home in the morning after applying for a leave. When she came home, she tried to act normal and told my dad she wasn't feeling well. She seemed quite worried about something. When I asked her what it was, she was reluctant at first because she did not want to scare me, but I insisted, and she shared her experience with me. I was shocked to hear that such a horrible thing happened to her since she was such a spiritual person. Mom still works at that hospital, but she never leaves home without her rosary. I believe it was a very frightening experience for my mother and also for me. I definitely don't want to go to that hospital anytime in my life. I work as a night nurse on a night shift schedule. This story is not particularly scary, but definitely one of the weirdest I've experienced. I work on this unit where there is just one hallway of rooms with a 20-bed capacity. Room 20 is at the very end of the hallway where the stairway to exit is located. Other than that, it's a dead end. At night, that side is particularly spookier than the rest of the unit. I've heard from my colleagues about some scary stuff they experienced on that side of the hallway, especially in room 20. The stories range from patients saying that they hear voices of children playing, to people talking in the middle of the night when almost everyone is quiet, and the staff are at the nurse's station charting or doing something else. The unit does not have children at all. Most of our patients are adults, never children because we have a pediatric unit for that. So when patients say they hear children playing in the room, that kind of raises a red flag for us. These patients are alert and oriented and are not confused. Just to clarify that. Regarding people talking, we dismiss that as probably just us staff talking. This particular experience by an aide of ours is somewhat terrifying, as this aide relayed what happened to me when we were talking about paranormal stuff in the hospital. Apparently, one night he went to help out the patient in room 20. I believe it was something about toileting or something else. Anyway, after finishing helping the patient and making her settled in the bed, the patient thanked the aide and asked him, "Have you seen that lady by the door? She's been standing there behind you for a while now. She might need your help." There was no lady by the door, and she was the only patient on that side of the hallway. If we do have some patients, they are in their rooms and not ambulating, since most can't ambulate on their own, and definitely one of the staff will be heading directly to that patient if they were ambulating for a risk of a fall. Our patients are mostly old, so with that being said, our aide quickly did what needed to be done and helped the patient settle in bed so he could leave the room as fast as possible. He was terrified as he recalls it to me. One time, we had a low census in the unit. That means most of the rooms are vacant since we only have so few patients. Now here's the thing. I do have my own assignment of patients, but I never particularly mind where other patients are situated at the time. I usually go to the restroom at the end of the hallway, passing by room 20. All night, every time I passed that room towards the restroom, I always felt like there was something off in that room. The room was particularly dark, and I was thinking maybe the patient wants it that way so they can sleep. The room's door is slightly open halfway, but I can still see inside the room. Though it is dark, I can still see silhouettes or outlines like the bed inside the room. All night long when I passed that hallway, I really thought there was a patient in there. And to my surprise, an aide of ours went into the room to set it up for an admitting patient. I was shocked and baffled that it was empty all along. Why was I confused to know that it was empty? Because all night long, I felt a presence in that room, which made me think that there was indeed a patient in there. That definitely creeped me out. Patients also reported sounds like walking on the wall or ceiling. I would understand and shrug it off if they described it as walking outside their doors, since we always walk in the hallway. That's not something paranormal. However, the patient described the sound like it was inside the room and on the walls, which is very weird. When I was younger, my friends and I used to play Manhunt, which is a harder version of hide and seek. We gradually got bored of playing in the woods and around estates, so we decided we'd visit somewhere scarier and better for the thrill. Near where I live, there are 2 abandoned mental hospitals. One we called South House and the other called Barnes Hospital. They were both used as hospitals for injured soldiers in World War II and later used for mental patients. Barnes was a much bigger and scarier place. It also had guards as it's a historic building and very dangerous, so they tried to stop letting anyone in there. We started off smaller and played at South House. The experiences here don't compare to anything like Barnes, but I thought I'd include them. There were about 10 to 15 of us playing. 2 people were finding, and the rest were hiding. We started on the top floor, and everyone ran and hid. A few others and I ran downstairs and hid in a room with a door. We hid in the corner of the room and left the door open a little bit so we could see if anyone was coming down the corridor. Then all of a sudden, the door slammed closed and wouldn't open. We could hear grunting from the other side, and then the force stopped, and the door opened freely. We all glanced outside, and nobody was there. Nobody could have had time to hide within the time they let go of the door, and none of our friends could have held the door against 4 of us in the room. We shouted for everyone, and we all got out of there. When we finally decided to go to Barnes, we wouldn't play Manhunt in there. It was too big and far too scary, so we'd always just walk around in groups, climb things, and discover new places in there. One day, we all decided to go to the basement. There were about 6 of us. It was pitch black, and the only source of light we had was the screen brightness on our phones. As we proceeded further into the basement, we got to the morgues, and my friend Daniel froze and pulled me back. I looked and screamed. We all ran out and didn't go back for months. As we looked at the morgue, on one of the slabs sticking out of the wall, we had seen a figure lift its head up and look directly at us. A few months later, when we had been back a couple of times, we went to a part of the hospital which vandals had set to fire. It was black and burned all around, and through a set of doors was one room that wasn't burnt. We went in, and in the middle of the room was a single cushioned chair. It had turquoise leather on it, and it was in fairly good condition considering it had been left there for about 20 to 30 years. My friend Gary had been dared to sit in the chair, and we were all laughing and joking about it, but as he went to sit down, his brother Daniel pulled him back. As we all looked, the imprint of a body slowly appeared in the chair. We all ran and haven't been back since.